It was a quiet afternoon in Meadowbrook, a town nestled between rolling hills and sprawling forests. Known for its slow pace of life, the small town was home to just over 2,000 people, where every face was familiar and every street held the comfort of a shared history. The town's rhythm was slow and steady, with neighbors greeting each other warmly as they passed by the local bakery or gathered for weekend farmers markets under the shade of old oak trees. This sense of community had drawn Michael Lawson to Meadowbrook years ago. Michael, a well-known millionaire, had built his fortune in the tech industry, but he preferred the simple life. Despite his wealth, he was a modest man, choosing to live alone in a grand but understated mansion just outside of town. His charitable work had made him beloved by the locals, but Michael had always kept a certain distance, preferring solitude over social gatherings. On this particular afternoon, Michael decided to take one of his routine hikes through the forest that bordered his property. The forest was his sanctuary, a place where he could escape the pressures of the world and clear his mind. Birds chirped above him, and the sunlight filtered through the dense canopy, casting dappled shadows on the path. As he walked deeper into the woods, the tranquility of the forest lulled him into a sense of peace. But that peace was suddenly shattered by an unexpected sight. Ahead, near a cluster of trees, Michael saw something out of place, what looked like a small figure, crouched near the base of a large oak. He squinted, unsure if his eyes were playing tricks on him. Curiosity piqued. He approached cautiously, and his heart quickened when he realized it was a child. A little girl, no older than 8, sat on the forest floor, clutching her knees to her chest. Her clothes were dirty and torn, and her face was streaked with tears. "Hey there," Michael called out softly, not wanting to startle her. "Are you okay?" The girl's head snapped up, her wide eyes filled with fear and confusion. She didn't respond, just stared at him, her lips trembling. Michael knelt down a few feet away from her, careful not to make any sudden movements. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said gently. "My name is Michael. What's your name?" For a long moment, the girl remained silent. Then, in a barely audible whisper, she muttered, "Emily." Michael's heart sank. There was something deeply unsettling about the way she looked, disoriented, as if she had no idea how she had ended up there. "Emily," he repeated. "Where's your mom? Are you lost?" The mention of her mother seemed to break something inside the girl, and she started to sob uncontrollably. Michael felt a wave of helplessness wash over him. He had no children of his own, but seeing a child so distraught hit him hard. "Hey, it's okay. You're safe now," he reassured her, reaching out a hand. After a brief hesitation, Emily took his hand, and Michael helped her to her feet. "Let's get you out of here, all right? We'll find your mom." Emily nodded, though her face was still etched with fear. As they walked back toward the town, Michael tried to ask her more questions. "Do you remember where you were before you came here?" he asked, glancing at her as she walked quietly beside him. Emily shook her head. "I don't know. I was with my mom. And then, I don't remember." The vagueness of her response sent a chill down Michael's spine. It wasn't just that she was lost. There was something else, something darker that she couldn't or wouldn't explain. "Were you at home?" Michael pressed gently. "Or somewhere else?" Emily hesitated, her small brow furrowing as she tried to recall. "We were supposed to be together. But then, he came." Michael stopped in his tracks, his stomach dropping. "He? Who?" But Emily didn't respond. Her gaze had gone distant, and she looked as though she was slipping back into the confusion that had overtaken her when he first found her. Michael decided not to push further for now. They continued on the path until they finally reached the edge of the forest, where the sun was beginning to set over the town. Michael led Emily to his car, his mind racing. He knew he couldn't just leave this girl alone. Something terrible had happened, that much was clear. He decided to bring her to his home first, figuring it would be best to contact the authorities and try to figure out where her mother was. When they arrived at his house, Emily seemed calmer, but still distant. Michael made a call to the local police station, explaining the situation and asking if anyone had reported a missing child. To his surprise, the officer on the other end of the line told him no such report had been filed. No missing person report. Nothing. Michael asked, incredulous, "Are you sure?" "Positive, Mr. Lawson. But we'll send someone over to check things out." Michael hung up the phone, a sense of unease creeping over him. Something wasn't right. Why hadn't anyone reported this little girl missing? And who was the man she had mentioned in the woods? The pieces didn't add up, and Michael had the sinking feeling that this was only the beginning of a much larger mystery. As he turned to check on Emily, who was now sitting quietly in his living room, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that this ordinary day had just become anything. As the evening settled into night, Michael sat in his living room, staring at the small girl sitting on his couch. Emily had fallen into an uneasy sleep, her small frame curled up, as if she were trying to protect herself from some unseen threat. The house was quiet, but Michael's mind buzzed with questions. Who was this child? Why had no one reported her missing? And what had she meant by "he came"? Minutes felt like hours as he waited for the police to arrive. His house, usually a refuge of peace, now felt heavy with an unsettling tension. Finally, there was a knock at the door, breaking the silence. Michael rose quickly and opened it to find Officer Samuels, a middle-aged, no-nonsense cop who had served Meadowbrook for over a decade. With him was Officer Barnes, a younger officer, new to the town. "Evening, Mr. Lawson," Samuels greeted, tipping his hat. His eyes were sharp, taking in the situation immediately. "You called about a missing girl?" "Yes, come in." Michael motioned them inside, leading them to where Emily slept on the couch. Samuels approached her with care, his gruff exterior softening at the sight of the small girl. "This her?" Michael nodded. "She says her name is Emily, but she can't seem to remember much. She said she was with her mother, but she doesn't know where she is now." Samuels exchanged a glance with Barnes. "No reports of a missing girl, Mr. Lawson. We checked the system before we came. No one in town seems to know anything about a child fitting her description." Michael frowned. "How is that possible? She didn't just appear out of nowhere." Barnes, standing by the door, scratched his head. "Could she be from out of town? Maybe a runaway. But someone would have reported her by now." "I don't think so," Michael replied, shaking his head. "She's too young to be a runaway, and she doesn't seem like she's been wandering for long. Her clothes are dirty, but she's not malnourished or hurt." He paused, considering his next words. "She mentioned something about a man visiting her mother, but that's all I got out of her." Samuels's brow furrowed. "A man, huh? Did she say anything about who this man was?" "No, just that he came. It's vague, but it feels like there's more to the story." Samuels sighed, rubbing his temples. "All right, here's what we'll do. We'll take her down to the station, try to get more out of her in the morning. Maybe she'll remember something else after a good night's rest. In the meantime, we'll start asking around. Someone's got to know something." As Samuels bent down to gently wake Emily, her eyes shot open wide with terror. "No, please, don't take me," she cried, scrambling to the edge of the couch. Her voice was panicked, her body trembling. Michael stepped forward, placing a calming hand on her shoulder. "Emily, it's okay. They're just here to help." But the fear in her eyes was raw and overwhelming. She clutched Michael's arm tightly, refusing to let go. "Don't leave me. Please don't leave me. He'll find me." The officers exchanged another glance, this time one filled with concern. Samuels straightened, rubbing his chin. "Maybe we should wait. Let her stay here with you for the night, Mr. Lawson. She seems to trust you." Michael hesitated, but he couldn't ignore the way Emily was clinging to him. She was scared of something or someone. "All right," he agreed. "She can stay here. I'll keep her safe." Samuels nodded. "We'll check in first thing in the morning. In the meantime, if you notice anything strange, you give us a call." After the officers left, Michael felt the weight of responsibility settle on him. He had no idea what he was getting into, but the look of fear on Emily's face was enough to convince him that something was terribly wrong. The next morning, Michael woke early. Emily was still asleep, nestled on the couch under a thick blanket. He made coffee and sat by the window, staring out at the quiet street. His mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of the puzzle. Who was this man Emily had mentioned? And why did the thought of him terrify her so much? His thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice behind him. "Michael." He turned to see Emily standing in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. She looked so small, so vulnerable in the soft morning light. "Good morning, Emily. How did you sleep?" She shrugged, still looking wary. "Okay, I guess." Michael gestured for her to join him at the kitchen table. "Are you hungry? I can make you some breakfast." Emily sat down, nodding. As Michael busied himself with making toast and eggs, he decided to try again. "Emily, do you remember anything more about what happened yesterday? You said something about a man. Can you tell me who he is?" Emily's face darkened. She stared at the table for a long moment before speaking, her voice barely a whisper. "He used to come to our house to see my mom. She didn't like him, but he always came. She told me not to talk to him, but he gave me things. Toys, sometimes candy." Michael's grip tightened on the spatula. "Do you know his name?" Emily shook her head. "No, but I remember his face. He always wore a nice suit, and he drove a big car." Michael's mind raced. A man in a suit, visiting regularly. Could it be someone important? Someone wealthy? But why would a man like that be involved with Emily's mother? And why was she so afraid of him now? "Emily," Michael said gently, "was this man the last person you saw before you ended up in the woods?" Emily hesitated, her eyes flickering with fear. She nodded slowly. Michael's stomach dropped. This wasn't just a case of a lost child. There was something far more sinister at play. He couldn't just leave this to the police. Whoever this man was, he had to find out more. He had to protect Emily. Later that morning, after feeding Emily and making sure she was comfortable watching TV in the living room, Michael stepped outside to make a call. He dialed Samuels's number, his mind racing with possibilities. "Samuel's here." "Officer, I've been thinking about what Emily said," Michael began, keeping his voice low. "She mentioned a man who used to visit her mother, a man who gave her gifts, who drove a big car. I think this might be more than just a missing person case." Samuels paused on the other end of the line. "What are you suggesting, Mr. Lawson?" "I don't know exactly," Michael admitted, "but I have a bad feeling about this. Something's not adding up." Samuel sighed. "Look, we're doing everything we can. We're asking around, seeing if anyone recognizes the girl, but so far, nothing." Michael's jaw tightened. "I can't just sit here and wait. I want to help." There was a long silence before Samuel spoke again. "All right, but don't do anything reckless. Let us handle the investigation." Michael hung up, knowing full well that he couldn't leave this in the hands of the authorities. He had the resources, the connections. He could dig deeper, and if there was one thing he knew for sure, it was that whoever this man was, he wasn't going to let Emily out of his sight. Michael returned inside, finding Emily watching cartoons. He sat beside her, offering a reassuring smile. "We're going to figure this out, Emily. I promise." But even as he said the words, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just stepped into something far darker and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The next few days passed in a haze of half-answers and dead ends. Michael had kept Emily with him, knowing the girl was safer under his watch than anywhere else. The police were making little headway in their investigation, and the absence of any missing persons report still haunted him. Something wasn't right. And the more Emily's fragmented memories began to surface, the more Michael felt he was standing at the edge of something deeply troubling. Determined to get answers, Michael began doing his own digging. He started by reaching out to a few discreet contacts he had cultivated over the years, people who specialized in uncovering secrets the authorities couldn't or wouldn't touch. Michael's wealth and influence opened doors, and it didn't take long for a few names to surface, names connected to the mysterious man who had visited Emily's mother. One evening, while Emily was asleep, Michael received a phone call from one of his contacts, a private investigator he trusted. "Michael, I found something," the investigator said. "It's about the girl's mother, Sarah Donovan." Michael leaned forward, his heart racing. "Go on." "She's not from Meadowbrook originally. Moved here about 10 years ago. Before that, she lived in the city and was involved with a man named Peter Langston." The name hit Michael like a punch to the gut. Peter Langston was one of the most powerful businessmen in the state, a real estate mogul with deep ties to political figures and the wealthiest families in the area. He was known for his charm and philanthropy, but there had always been rumors, whispers about his private life and his business dealings that suggested something darker beneath the surface. "Langston," Michael repeated, incredulous. "You're saying Emily's mother was involved with him?" "More than just involved," the investigator replied. "They had a relationship, one that ended badly. From what I've pieced together, Langston kept things quiet. But there was a scandal, a pretty big one. Sarah tried to expose him, claimed he was involved in some illegal activities, but she had no proof, and Langston used his influence to bury the story." Michael felt his stomach churn. What kind of illegal activities are we talking about? Drugs, money laundering, possibly even human trafficking, the investigator said, his voice lowering as if the very mention of these things could invoke danger. "It's hard to pin down, but there were a lot of rumors. Sarah apparently found out more than she should have, but without solid evidence, no one believed her. She fled to Meadowbrook shortly after. Looks like she was trying to keep a low profile." Michael's mind raced. He had never imagined that Emily's mother could be connected to something this dark, this dangerous. It explained the fear, the secrecy, the reason no one had reported the girl missing. But it raised even more questions. Had Langston found them? Was he the man Emily had seen visiting her mother? The pieces were starting to come together, and they painted a picture far more sinister than Michael had expected. The following morning, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that everything was closing in. He sat across from Emily at the breakfast table, watching her silently eat her cereal. She looked like any other child, innocent and fragile. But now, Michael knew she was at the center of something much larger. "Emily," he said gently, "I need to ask you something. Do you remember the man who used to visit your mom? Was his name Peter Langston?" Emily paused, her spoon hovering over the bowl. She frowned, as if struggling to place the name. "I don't know. Maybe? My mom never said his name." Michael's heart sank. "Do you remember what he looked like?" Emily thought for a moment, then nodded. "He had dark hair, and he always wore a suit, and he smelled like expensive soap." She wrinkled her nose at the memory. That description fit Langston perfectly. Michael's suspicions were all but confirmed. Langston had been involved with Sarah, and now, it seemed, he was trying to cover his tracks. Michael decided to visit Sarah's old neighborhood in the city, hoping to uncover more about her past. It was a rundown area, worlds apart from Meadowbrook's quaint charm. As he walked through the streets, he found people who still remembered Sarah. A few neighbors mentioned how she had kept to herself after the fallout with Langston, how she had lived in fear during those last few months before leaving. But one neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Daniels, provided the missing piece. Sarah was a good woman, Mrs. Daniels said, her voice trembling as she sat on her porch. She tried to do the right thing, but Langston, he was too powerful. He destroyed her life. "What do you mean?" Michael asked, leaning in. Mrs. Daniels shook her head sadly. Sarah found out about Langston's dirty dealings. She tried to go to the police, but no one would listen. And then, one night, after she tried to expose him, her house was broken into. They didn't take anything, just left a message. She never told me what it said, but I could tell. It terrified her. Michael felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Do you think Langston was behind it? The old woman nodded. Oh, I'm sure of it. After that night, she packed up and left. I think she was trying to protect her little girl. The truth was starting to come into focus. Sarah had fled to Meadowbrook to escape Langston's grasp, but somehow he had found her again. The man Emily had seen visiting her mother was almost certainly Langston, or someone working for him. And now, with Sarah out of the picture, Emily was in more danger than ever. Back in Meadowbrook, Michael sat in his study, his mind swirling with conflicting thoughts. He had uncovered a dark truth about Emily's mother, a past that involved corruption, fear, and danger. But the most troubling realization was that Sarah had been trying to do the right thing, only to be crushed by Langston's power. As Michael stared out the window, he realized he was facing a moral dilemma of his own. He could go to the police with what he had discovered, but without solid evidence, it might all be swept under the rug, just like Sarah's claims. Langston's influence was vast, and if he caught wind that someone was digging into his past, Emily could be in even more danger. Michael's hand trembled as he picked up his phone. He was torn between doing what was right and protecting the girl who now depended on him. Could he really fight against a man as powerful as Langston, or would he, like Sarah, be silenced before the truth could come out? Before he could make the call, there was a knock at his door. Michael's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't expecting anyone. When he opened the door, his breath caught in his throat. Standing there, dressed in a sharp suit and wearing a cold, calculated smile, was Peter Langston himself. Michael Lawson, I presume. Langston's voice was smooth, almost friendly, but there was a dangerous edge to it. We need to talk. The life-altering moment had arrived. Michael's entire world was about to change. Peter Langston stood in the doorway of Michael's home, his presence casting a long shadow over the entire room. There was something unsettling about the way he smiled, as if he already knew he was in control. Michael's heart pounded as Langston stepped inside, casually glancing around as though he were visiting an old friend. Mr. Lawson, Langston said, his voice smooth but laced with menace, I believe you've been looking into things that don't concern you. Michael stood his ground, his pulse racing. I'm just trying to protect Emily. Langston's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. And I'm here to make sure you don't get hurt trying to do the impossible. You don't know what you're dealing with. For a moment, silence hung thick in the air between them. Michael's mind raced. He had uncovered enough about Langston's past to know that the man was dangerous. But if Langston was here, it meant that Emily was in even more danger than he had realized. Whatever power Langston wielded, it extended far beyond simple wealth and influence. It was a threat to anyone who stood in his way. Langston took a step closer, lowering his voice. Here's my advice, Michael. Leave this alone. Take the girl to the authorities. Walk away. And forget this ever happened. You don't want to find yourself on the wrong side of this. Michael clenched his fists, feeling the weight of Langston's words. The man wasn't just threatening him. He was laying out a path to safety. But that path would mean abandoning Emily, leaving her to fend for herself against a man capable of anything. I'm not walking away, Michael said, his voice steady. I know what you did to Sarah, and I'm not going to let you do the same to her daughter. Langston's smile faded. For the first time, his expression hardened into something colder, more dangerous. Then I guess we'll have to see how far you're willing to go. With that, he turned and left, leaving Michael standing in the doorway, his heart racing. The fallout from Michael's decision not to back down hit the town of Meadowbrook like a tidal wave. Within days, whispers of what had transpired between him and Langston began to spread, fueled by a few well-placed rumors. It didn't take long for the local media to latch onto the story. Reporters swarmed the town, hungry for any scrap of information that could turn this quiet community into front-page news. Soon, the story was everywhere. Millionaire battles corrupt businessmen to protect abandoned girl. The headlines painted Michael as either a hero or a fool, depending on who was telling the story. Some articles lauded him for standing up against a powerful man like Langston, while others hinted that Michael had crossed a line and was in over his head. As the media circus grew, so did the town's reaction. In a place as small and tight-knit as Meadowbrook, news spread fast, and people quickly took sides. At first, most of the town had supported Michael. He had always been a respected figure, known for his generosity and quiet leadership. But as the details of Langston's connection to Sarah began to surface, opinions shifted. "He's risking everything for a girl he doesn't even know," one neighbor muttered to another as they watched a news crew set up in front of Michael's mansion. "He's going to get himself killed." Another added, "Langston's too powerful. He should have let the authorities handle it." But not everyone saw it that way. A small but vocal group of townspeople rallied behind Michael, seeing his actions as brave, even heroic. They admired his refusal to back down in the face of Langston's threats, and they supported his decision to protect Emily at all costs. "He's doing the right thing," said Sandra, a local shop owner. "We should all be standing up to people like Langston." The divide in the community grew sharper by the day. Some residents avoided Michael altogether, afraid of getting caught up in the storm that now surrounded him. Others dropped off food and letters of encouragement, offering their support in whatever way they could. But no matter what side people took, one thing was certain: Michael had become the center of a conflict far larger than himself. With the media frenzy and town divided, Michael found himself trapped in a whirlwind of public scrutiny. News crews camped outside his home, eager for a glimpse of Emily or an interview with the man who had dared to take on one of the state's most powerful figures. Reporters hounded him at every turn, twisting the narrative to fit their own agendas. "Mr. Lawson, do you have any comment on the allegations about Sarah Donovan's past?" one reporter shouted as Michael stepped outside to get his mail. Another called, "Do you think you can win against Langston? Aren't you afraid for your safety?" Michael ignored them all, but inside, the pressure was mounting. He couldn't escape the feeling that he was being pushed closer to the edge with every passing day. The more he fought to protect Emily, the more dangerous the situation became, and the town's growing uncertainty about him only made it worse. The local authorities, once sympathetic, were now wary of his involvement. Officer Samuels had been a steady ally at first, but even he was starting to distance himself from the situation. "Michael," Samuels said during one of their increasingly strained phone calls, "you've got to be careful. Langston has connections, and the longer this drags out, the worse it's going to get. I'm not sure how much more I can do for you." Michael understood the warning. The law in Meadowbrook had its limits, and Langston was far beyond them. But Michael had made his choice. He wasn't backing down, not now, not after everything he had uncovered. The breaking point came one afternoon when a local news anchor reported a new angle on the story. A confidential source had leaked details about Sarah Donovan's alleged involvement in criminal activities years ago. The report painted Sarah as a disgraced woman who had tried to take down Langston by any means necessary, suggesting that her claims about his illegal dealings were nothing more than a desperate attempt to escape her own past. The story spread like wildfire, and soon the entire town was buzzing with gossip. People began to question whether Michael was truly acting out of altruism or if he had been manipulated by Sarah's lies. The same neighbors who had once supported him were now avoiding eye contact, and whispers followed him wherever he went. "You see what they're saying about him," a man whispered to his wife as they walked past Michael in a grocery store. "I knew there had to be more to the story." It was a crushing blow. Michael felt the weight of the town's doubt pressing down on him, and for the first time, he wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. Langston's reach extended further than he had ever imagined, and now, it wasn't just Emily's safety at stake. It was his own reputation, his standing in the community, and even his life. That night, as Michael sat in his study, watching the news coverage spiral further out of control, he realized the stakes had never been higher. He had already lost the trust of half the town, And with each passing day, Langston's influence seemed to grow stronger. But as he looked at Emily, curled up on the couch, sleeping soundly despite the chaos surrounding them, he knew there was no going back. No matter what the town thought of him, no matter how much pressure he faced, he couldn't abandon her. Langston had to be stopped, and the truth, whatever it was, had to come out. Michael knew the road ahead was dangerous, and the odds were stacked against him, but he had made his decision. Tomorrow, he would confront Langston once and for all. The storm that had swept through Michael's life felt relentless. The town of Meadowbrook was a place where secrets didn't stay hidden for long. Yet somehow, Michael had stumbled upon something far darker and more complex than anyone had imagined. Every step deeper into Emily's past only seemed to lead to more questions, and now the whole town had turned into a pressure cooker of rumors, doubt, and confusion. Michael had been preparing himself to face Peter Langston once and for all, but he wasn't prepared for the bombshell that would shatter everything he thought he knew. It started innocently enough. Michael had been sifting through old documents, police reports, and anything he could find about Sarah Donovan's past, determined to find some kind of leverage against Langston. The more he looked, the more he found that things didn't add up. There were missing records, altered details, and strange gaps in time that suggested a cover-up. Langston's fingerprints were all over it. But then something unexpected surfaced, a piece of information that sent a chill down Michael's spine. It was a hospital record, buried deep in a pile of unrelated documents, marked with an unfamiliar name. At first glance, it seemed like a routine birth certificate. A baby girl, born 8 years ago, in a private clinic outside of town. But the name listed under father stopped Michael cold. The father's name wasn't Peter Langston. It was David Harris. David Harris, one of Meadowbrook's most respected citizens, had been a lifelong friend to Michael. David wasn't just anyone. He was a local politician, known for his community work and his unwavering dedication to the town's well-being. He had been a trusted friend of Michael's for years, the kind of man you'd never expect to be tangled in a web of deceit. Michael stared at the document, his mind racing. How could this be possible? David had never mentioned anything about a child, let alone a connection to Sarah Donovan. Yet here it was in black and white. David Harris was Emily's father. Michael's hands trembled as he folded the paper and slipped it into his jacket. The revelation gnawed at him, the weight of this new information too much to bear. Emily's real father wasn't some distant figure or an unknown entity. He was right here, in the very heart of the town, a man Michael had trusted for years. But why had David hidden this? Why had he let Sarah and Emily live in fear, running from Langston, while he stayed in Meadowbrook, continuing his life as though nothing was wrong? Michael's mind raced with questions, and with every new possibility, he felt more and more trapped in the layers of deceit that surrounded him. The next day, Michael confronted David at his home. He hadn't planned it. His feet had simply carried him to David's doorstep, the birth certificate burning a hole in his pocket. When David opened the door, his expression shifted from warm to cautious in an instant. "Michael," David greeted him, his smile faltering slightly. "Didn't expect to see you here today. Everything all right?" "No," Michael said bluntly. "I need to talk to you. It's about Emily." The name alone was enough to freeze David in his tracks. His face paled, and he stepped aside, letting Michael inside without a word. The door closed behind them with a soft click, but the tension in the room was palpable. David led Michael to the living room, where he motioned for him to sit. "What's going on?" David asked, his voice steady, but his eyes flickering with something Michael couldn't quite place. "Is Emily okay?" Michael didn't sit. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the birth certificate, unfolding it slowly and laying it on the table between them. "I found this." David's eyes locked onto the paper, and for a moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he lowered himself into the chair opposite Michael, his face ashen. "Where did you get that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It doesn't matter where I got it," Michael replied. "What matters is why I didn't know about it. Why didn't anyone know?" David ran a hand through his hair, his expression a mix of regret and shame. "It's complicated, Michael. Complicated." Michael's voice rose, frustration boiling over. "You're her father, and you let Sarah run, let her hide from Langston, all while you stayed here, pretending you didn't know. Why didn't you protect her? Why didn't you protect Emily?" David looked away, his hands clenched in his lap. "I tried to protect them. I thought keeping my distance would keep them safe. Sarah, she made me promise. She didn't want Emily to grow up in the shadow of my name. She didn't want her to be a part of the life I live, the life of politics and deals and—" He broke off, shaking his head. "She was afraid of Langston. We both were." Michael stared at him, incredulous. "So, you just let her run? You thought that was enough?" David's eyes filled with a pain that Michael hadn't expected. "I didn't have a choice. Sarah believed that if I stayed close, it would only make things worse. She thought Langston would come after me, and that Emily would be caught in the crossfire. I agreed to stay away, thinking it was for the best. But now I see that it wasn't." The weight of David's words hit Michael hard. He could see the guilt etched into every line of his friend's face, but it didn't make the situation any easier. David had made a choice, one that had left Sarah and Emily vulnerable to Langston's manipulations. "There's more to this," Michael said quietly. "Isn't there?" David nodded, his shoulders slumping. Sarah wasn't just running from Langston because of what she knew. She was trying to protect Emily from him. Langston, he wanted Emily. He knew she wasn't his, but he didn't care. He saw her as a bargaining chip, a way to control Sarah, and by extension, me. Michael's stomach turned. He was using a child as leverage. David's voice broke. "I tried to stop it, Michael. I tried to keep Sarah and Emily out of it, but Langston's reach is too far. By the time I realized how deep it went, Sarah had already made up her mind to leave. I thought staying out of it would protect them." A heavy silence fell between them. Michael felt the weight of the moral dilemma settle in his chest. He could take this new information to the authorities, reveal the truth about Emily's parentage and the real reason Sarah had been running. But doing so would not only expose David and his past mistakes, it could also draw even more unwanted attention to Emily, thrusting her into the center of a public scandal that could destroy her future. On the other hand, keeping the secret meant allowing Langston to continue manipulating people's lives from the shadows. The entire town would continue to be deceived, and Langston's grip on the community would tighten even further. Michael stared at his old friend, feeling the enormity of the decision before him. He didn't want to hurt Emily any more than she had already been hurt, but how could he stand by and do nothing? "Michael," David said, his voice low and broken. "Please, I've made mistakes, but I'm asking you not to punish Emily for them. I'll do whatever I can to protect her now. But if this gets out, she'll never have a normal life." Michael met his eyes and saw the desperation there. The choice was his, and no matter what he decided, the consequences would ripple far beyond the walls of this room. He had to decide whether to reveal the truth and risk everything, or protect Emily from a lifetime of trauma and keep the secret buried. The events of the last few weeks had left Michael's life, and the town of Meadowbrook irrevocably changed. What had started as a simple act of kindness, helping a lost little girl in the woods, had unraveled into a dark web of secrets and lies. Now, standing on the other side of the storm, Michael couldn't help but reflect on how everything had transformed, not just for him, but for the entire community. After the confrontation with David, Michael had made his choice. He couldn't betray Emily's trust, nor could he drag her through the public scandal that would inevitably follow if the truth about her father came out. So he decided to protect her. He kept the secret buried, choosing instead to focus on ensuring that Emily and Sarah would be safe from Peter Langston's reach. In the days following his decision, Michael worked tirelessly behind the scenes, using his connections and resources to secure protection for Sarah and Emily. With the help of his trusted investigator, he arranged for them to be moved to a secure location far away from Meadowbrook, where Langston's influence couldn't touch them. It wasn't an ideal solution, but it was the best he could offer. The morning Emily and Sarah left Meadowbrook was bittersweet. Michael stood in the driveway of his mansion, watching as the car pulled up to take them away. Emily, who had grown attached to him during her time in his care, looked up at him with wide eyes, her small hand clutching a stuffed animal he had given her. "Will I see you again?" she asked, her voice soft, almost hopeful. Michael knelt down beside her, his heart heavy. "I hope so, Emily. But more than anything, I want you and your mom to be safe. That's what matters right now." Emily nodded, though she didn't fully understand the danger she was being protected from. She hugged him tightly, and Michael felt a surge of emotion wash over him. He had grown to care deeply for the little girl, and saying goodbye felt like letting go of something precious. Sarah, standing nearby, looked at Michael with gratitude and sadness. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You saved us, Michael. I'll never forget that." Michael shook his head. "Just promise me you'll keep her safe. That's all I need." With one last look, Sarah and Emily got into the car and drove away, leaving Michael standing in the quiet of his front yard. He watched until the car disappeared down the road, feeling the weight of his decision settle in. As the weeks passed, the town of Meadowbrook slowly adjusted to the revelations that had come to light. The news of Peter Langston's corruption and his connection to Sarah had leaked out, though the full extent of the truth remained hidden. Langston had fled town under a cloud of scandal, his once sterling reputation in ruins. But despite his departure, the damage he had done to the town lingered. The community was deeply divided. Some residents, especially those who had long admired Langston, felt betrayed by the revelations. They had believed in his public persona, supported his business ventures, and now felt disillusioned by the truth. To them, Michael's involvement in exposing Langston had caused unnecessary disruption, and they resented the changes that followed. But there were others who saw Michael as a hero, a man who had stood up to corruption and fought for the vulnerable. They admired his courage and integrity, rallying around him in support. Small acts of kindness, like people leaving notes of gratitude at his doorstep or offering him free coffee at the local diner, became common. Yet, even among his supporters, there was unease. The full story had never been told, and rumors swirled about Michael's true motivations. The town, once so unified, now felt fractured, its fabric torn by secrets. Michael couldn't ignore the shift in how people treated him. Walking through town, he could feel the eyes on him. Some filled with admiration, others with suspicion. But no matter how people viewed him, he knew one thing for certain. He had done what he believed was right. He had chosen to protect Emily and her mother, even if it meant sacrificing his own reputation and peace of mind. One evening, after weeks of quiet reflection, Michael sat alone in his study, looking out at the setting sun. The last rays of light stretched across the horizon, casting the town in a warm golden glow. He thought about how much had changed. He had always considered himself a man of principle, someone who used his wealth and influence to help others. But this experience had shown him the limits of his power and the complexities of real moral dilemmas. There was no clear right or wrong in what had happened. He had been forced to navigate a world of gray, where protecting one person's future meant hiding the truth from another. And though he didn't regret his choice, he couldn't help but wonder about the long-term consequences. The experience had transformed him in ways he hadn't expected. He was no longer just a wealthy benefactor, living in his mansion and helping from a distance. He had become someone willing to get his hands dirty, to make difficult decisions for the sake of what he believed in. And for the first time in years, Michael felt like he was truly a part of something larger than himself, a part of the town, a part of the community's struggles and triumphs. But the town, for all its divisions, would eventually heal. Meadowbrook had weathered storms before, and it would again. Michael knew that time would smooth over the rough edges of the scandal, and the town would move on, though perhaps never quite the same as before. As for Emily and Sarah, their future was uncertain. Michael had arranged for them to live in a place where they could start fresh, free from the shadows of Langston's past. But he knew that no matter how far they went, the memories of what had happened would stay with them. He hoped that Emily would grow up in peace, far from the chaos that had defined the last few months of her life. But only time would tell what kind of woman she would become. As Michael sat in his study, reflecting on everything that had transpired, he couldn't help but wonder about the choices he had made. Had he done the right thing by protecting Emily and keeping the full truth hidden? Or had he simply postponed an inevitable reckoning? He leaned back in his chair, staring at the darkening sky outside his window, and let the question hang in the air. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you protect the girl or expose the truth? He left the question open, knowing that each person's answer would be different. But the question itself, the moral dilemma, was what lingered. And as the night fell over Meadowbrook, Michael knew that, for better or worse, he had changed, just as the town had. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: nothing would ever be the same again.